auf dem Front setzt sich an die Spitze der Nachschubkolonne.
By the summer of 1942, the Second World War had entered a new and dangerous phase. Germany had failed to defeat Britain, the war on the West was stalled, but Adolf Hitler believed the conflict could still be decided with a single, overwhelming blow. Not across the English Channel, but deep inside the Soviet Union. When German forces invaded the USSR in 1941, they launched the largest military operation in history. Millions of soldiers surged eastward. Entire Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed. Cities fell in rapid succession. To many outside observers, the Soviet Union appeared on the verge of collapse. But the war did not end. Instead, it slowed. By winter of 41, German forces were halted outside Moscow. Supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Cold, exhaustion, and Soviet resistance forced Germany onto the defensive for the first time. The Red Army survived, battered, but intact. Hitler now faced a reality he had not planned for. The Soviet Union was still standing. What followed was not a retreat, but a gamble. A decision to strike south, towards oil, industry, and a city that would become synonymous with destruction. That city was Stalingrad. For Hitler, the Eastern Front was always the decisive theater of the war. Germany lacked oil, it lacked manpower reserves, it lacked the ability to fight a prolonged global conflict. Victory depended on destroying the Soviet Union quickly and completely. By 1942, Germany no longer had the strength to attack everywhere at once. Choices had to be made. The new plan, Operation Blue, shifted focus away from Moscow and towards southern Russia. The objective was clear: seize the oil fields of the Caucasus and cut the Soviet Union off from vital resources. Stalingrad lay directly in the path of that advance. It was not just a city, it was a gateway. On paper, Stalingrad was not Germany's primary target. It was not the largest city in the Soviet Union. It was not a political capital, but it sat on the Volga River, a critical artery that carried oil, grain, and raw materials from the south of the Soviet Union. Control of the Volga meant strangling Soviet logistics, but Stalingrad carried another weight: its name. It bore the name of Joseph Stalin himself. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad promised a symbolic victory powerful as any military gain. For Stalin, losing it would be an ideological disaster. What might have remained a limited operation became something else entirely, a test of will. As German forces pushed towards Stalingrad in the summer of 42, early success masked a growing danger. The Wehrmacht advanced hundreds of kilometers across open steppe, but the deeper it went, the weaker its position became. Supply lines stretched thin, fuel shortages worsened, vehicles broke down faster than they could be repaired. To maintain momentum, Germany split its forces. One group drove towards the Caucasus oil fields, another, the Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, was tasked with taking Stalingrad. This decision diluted German strength at the exact moment concentration was needed most. But still, the advance continued. By August, German forces were approaching the city. Before German infantry ever entered Stalingrad, the Luftwaffe attacked. Massive bombing raids struck the city day after day. Entire districts were flattened. Factories burned, civilian casualties mounted into the tens of thousands. But the bombing did not break Stalingrad, it transformed it. The destruction turned the city into a landscape of rubble, concrete, and twists of steel. Streets disappeared, buildings collapsed into defensible ruins. Instead of clearing the way for a rapid victory, the bombing created the perfect environment for close quarters defense. Stalingrad would not be taken quickly, it would be fought over inch by inch. As German forces closed in, Soviet leadership faced a choice: withdraw across the Volga or stand and fight. Stalin chose to stand. The order issued to the Soviet forces was uncompromising: not one step back. The meaning was clear: retreat would be treated as betrayal. The city would be held at all costs. For the soldiers ordered to defend Stalingrad, it was not just rhetoric, it was a death sentence. When fighting began inside the city, it bore little resemblance to the war Germany had fought before. There were no sweeping maneuvers, no breakthroughs, no clear front lines. The battle dissolved into chaos. Factories became fortresses, apartment buildings became killing zones, basements, stairwells, and sewer tunnels turned into battlegrounds. Control of a single room could cost dozens of lives. German soldiers called it Rattenkrieg, or Rat War. Every advantage Germany held in mobility, coordination, and firepower was neutralized by the environment. The war slowed to a crawl, and casualties soared. By September 1942, German forces controlled much of Stalingrad, but not enough to declare total victory. Soviet defenders clung onto narrow strips of land along the Volga. Reinforcements crossed the river under constant fire. Many never made it across, yet the line held. German commanders believed collapse was imminent. In reality, the battle was only just beginning. Behind the scenes, the Soviet high command was preparing something far larger than a street fighting operation, not designed to save Stalingrad, but to destroy the army attacking it. Stalingrad had become a symbol, an obsession, and a battlefield unlike any. Germany believed victory was close. The Soviet Union was preparing to strike back, not inside the city, but around it. By November 1942, the battle for Stalingrad reached a breaking point. Inside the city, German and Soviet units were locked in a brutal, close-range combat. Entire regiments were reduced to fragments. Ammunition was running low, casualties mounted daily. Yet the 6th German Army remained committed, convinced that final victory was only days away. What German commanders did not fully grasp was that the decisive battle was no longer being fought inside Stalingrad itself. It was being prepared far beyond the ruins of the city. The German advance into southern Russia had created a fatal vulnerability. Elite German divisions were concentrated inside Stalingrad, fighting for factories, riverbanks, and shattered neighborhoods. But the long northern and southern flanks protecting the 6th Army were held by Axis allies, primarily Romanian forces, with Italian and Hungarian units further out. These formations were stretched thin. They lacked modern anti-tank weapons, their artillery was limited, many soldiers were exhausted, poorly supplied, and facing Soviet armor with equipment never designed for such a fight. German field officers warned repeatedly that the flanks were exposed. Hitler dismissed the warnings. He believed the Red Army had already committed its last reserves. He believed the Soviets were incapable of launching a large-scale counteroffensive. He believed Stalingrad was the final test. He was wrong. While German attention remained fixed on the city, the Soviet High Command prepared a counterstrike of enormous scale. The plan was called Operation Uranus. Its objective was not to retake Stalingrad street by street. Instead, it aimed to destroy the German 6th Army by surrounding it completely. The concept was deceptively simple. Soviet forces would strike the weaker Axis flanks north and south of Stalingrad. Armored units would punch through, drive deep into the rear, and link up west of the city, cutting off all routes of escape. The Germans would be trapped. What made the plan effective was timing. The attack would come in late autumn when German troops were exhausted and winter conditions were setting in. And it would come with overwhelming force. At dawn, November 19th, 1942, the Soviet offensive began. Thousands of artillery guns opened fire on Romanian positions north of Stalingrad. The bombardment shattered defensive lines that were never designed to withstand such pressure. Within hours, Soviet infantry and tanks surged forward. The following day, a German-Soviet attack struck south of the city. The Romanian defenses collapsed with alarming speed. Soviet armored formations exploited gaps faster than German command could react. Communications broke down, units were encircled or overrun. German reserves were too distant, too few, or already committed inside Stalingrad. The breakthrough widened into a flood. On November 23, 1942, Soviet spearheads from the north and south met near the town of Kalach, west of Stalingrad. The encirclement was complete. More than 250,000 Axis troops, the bulk of the German 6th Army along with supporting units, were now trapped inside a shrinking pocket. For the first time in the war, an entire German field army had been surrounded and cut off. Inside the pocket, confusion quickly turned into dread. Supply lines were severed, fuel stocks dwindled, medical services were overwhelmed. Wounded soldiers filled makeshift hospitals and basements in ruined factories. Yet many German officers still believed escape was possible if action was taken immediately. German commanders urged a breakthrough while the 6th Army still had strength. They argued that a rapid westward push could reconnect with German forces outside the pocket. Every day of delay would make escape more difficult. Hitler refused. Instead, he issued a direct order. The Sixth Army would hold its ground. Stalingrad would not be abandoned. Hitler assured commanders that the Luftwaffe would supply the trapped army by air until a relief operation arrived. The pocket would become a fortress. This decision defied both experience and logistics. The Luftwaffe had never supplied a force of this size under such conditions. Winter weather, Soviet air defenses, and limited transport capability made success impossible, but the order stood. To keep the Sixth Army operational, the Luftwaffe needed to deliver hundreds of tons of supplies every day. In reality, it delivered only a fraction. Aircrafts were lost to Soviet fighters in anti-aircraft fire. Weather grounded flights for days at a time. Airfields inside the pocket were damaged or captured. Fuel shortages limited flight operations. Food rations were cut again and again. Ammunition ran dangerously low. Wounded soldiers froze while waiting for evacuation that never came. The airlift did not sustain the army, it prolonged its suffering. As one German officer later admitted, we were no longer fighting for victory, only for survival. As December set in, the situation inside the pocket became desperate. Temperatures plunged far below freezing, frostbite and illness spread rapidly, vehicles stopped functioning, weapons jammed, horses were slaughtered for food. Soviet forces tightened the ring, reducing the size of the pocket step by step. German relief attempts from the outside, including Operation Winter Storm, failed to break through. Each failed attempt confirmed the truth. The Sixth Army was on its own, yet surrender was forbidden. Hitler ordered the army to hold out, insisting that endurance alone would change the situation. In reality, endurance only delayed the inevitable. By early January 1943, the Sixth Army was trapped, starving, and freezing. What had begun as a campaign of conquest had become a battle of attrition, and Germany was losing. By January 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad had entered its final phase. Inside the pocket, the German Sixth Army no longer resembled a fighting force. It was a collection of exhausted, starving, and freezing units clinging to ruins that no longer held strategic value. Ammunition was nearly gone. Food rations were reduced to a fraction of survivable levels. Medical supplies had run out entirely. The illusion of rescue had vanished. What remained was endurance and denial. The Soviet command had no intention of rushing the final assault. Instead, Red Army forces applied steady, crushing pressure from all sides. Artillery bombarded German positions daily. Infantry advanced methodically, reducing the pocket sector by sector. Every contraction meant fewer airfields, fewer supply drops, and fewer places to hide. German defensive lines collapsed inwards. Units that once numbered thousands were reduced to dozens. Communication between formations broke down. Commanders lost contact with subordinate units entirely. The Sixth Army no longer operated as a single force, only as isolated pockets of resistance. As Soviet troops advanced, German airfields inside the pocket became primary targets. Once these airfields were lost, the airlift, already failing, would completely end. One by one, they fell. Aircraft attempting to land came under artillery fire. Some crashed on approach. Others were destroyed from the ground. Evacuation of wounded became nearly impossible. For the men on the ground, this was the moment hope truly died. There would be no more supplies, no evacuation, no relief. Only surrender or death. Despite the reality on the ground, Hitler continued to order issues from afar. He demanded resistance to the last man. He forbade surrender under any circumstances. He insisted that holding Stalingrad tied down Soviet forces and served a greater strategic purpose. These orders ignored the fact that the Sixth Army was no longer influencing the wider war. It was simply dying. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazi seizure of power, Hitler promoted Friedrich Paulus to Field Marshal. The implication was unmistakable. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered. The message was not encouragement, it was expectation. Paulus did not commit suicide. He did not order a final breakout. He did not sacrifice the remaining men for symbolism. On January 31st, 1943, Paulus surrendered the southern group of the Sixth Army. 2 days later, the remaining northern group laid down his arms. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. more than 90,000 German soldiers went into captivity. Only a fraction would ever return home. The Sixth Army, once one of Germany's most powerful formations, ceased to exist. The human cost of Stalingrad was staggering. Casualty estimates vary, but combined losses on both sides exceeded 2 million killed, wounded, or captured. Entire divisions were destroyed, cities were erased, generations were scarred. For Germany, the losses were irreplaceable. Experienced officers, veteran NCOs, trained soldiers, gone. But for the Soviet Union, the cost was horrific, but survivable. The Red Army could replace men, Germany could not. And more importantly, Germany had lost something far more dangerous than manpower. It had lost belief. Before Stalingrad, the German army